Well, first, thanks, Kristen, and thanks to all of you for staying. I feel like you're the people who are either most committed to democracy and or the people who are most concerned about it, because you're still here towards the end of the day. My wife, when she was looking at the program for today, said, you know, there's a lot of speakers, and you guys are the last ones. You better be witty and entertaining. So I have warned Yascha that we're going to have to figure out how to do that while talking about the crisis of populism and polarization and democracy. So we're going to start with what will probably be a continuation in some respects of some of the sober assessments of the state of affairs that we've heard throughout the day, and we will end on hope and optimism. So you will leave, I think, feeling better than you do right now. But I want to start, because we're at the Jewish Community Relations Council event, I feel like I would be remiss, Yascha, if I didn't ask you to talk a little bit about your, at least for this room, probably unique upbringing as a Jewish person in Germany, and how that experience has actually informed your opinion of kind of the state of affairs when it comes to democracy right now.
Small question to begin with. So I grew up Jewish in Germany. My grandparents were born in various shtetls scattered around in Central and Eastern Europe. They became communists as teenagers, sort of moved to Poland, helped to build up the regime there after World War II, and were promptly thrown out by it in 1968 when it turned on the Jews who remained in the country at that time. And so after various stops and so on, my mom ended up in Germany, where I was born and grew up. And I guess it sort of informs my thinking about how to build a multi-ethnic society. And the other thing that Mike told me is, don't be as depressing as you usually are. So I'm trying to look at positive lessons here, at least for the United States, which is that, when I was growing up in Germany, I think the country still had a deeply mono-ethnic, cultural understanding of who we belonged. And so when I mentioned that I was Jewish, a few weird things happened. So first of all, sometimes I experienced straightforward anti-Semitism. That's relatively rare, but it existed. More often, I got a sort of weird philo-Semitism of people who really associated sort of Jews with obviously the Holocaust and the Third Reich, the Holocaust, sort of what it means to be a German, and to more sort of liberal left-leaning Germans who I tend to be surrounded with when I grew up. That meant that how they defined being German was in part of their very pride for what happened in the past. And because there were so few Jews in the country, when they met me, there was an incredible opportunity to sort of prove how sorry they were for the past. And so therefore to treat me particularly well. All of which was pretty creepy and unpleasant. So I, growing up in Germany, never really came to feel German, even though I was born and grew up. And when you look at the United States, that's very different. I have cousins who were born and raised in New York. And if I ask them, do you feel American? Which is a question that to me, do I feel German? It's a simple question, it's complicated. If I ask my New York cousins, do you feel American? They sort of look at me and I am American, but I mean, do I feel American? That's not a question that sort of makes sense to me, right? And that's a real difference between the United States and many other countries in the world. A couple of years ago, I was doing some reporting for a journalistic piece, and I ended up going to a school where this quite amazing lady was teaching Islamic religion lesson. And she makes it sort of, nice, whatever point, it doesn't matter if you're Sunni or Shia, it doesn't matter whether you're Muslim or Christian or Jewish, not religious at all, that doesn't determine whether you're a good person or not, right? And there's one kid who was about 12, didn't even wait to raise his hand, sort of jumped in and said, that's right, I have a German friend. And I spoke to him afterwards, and it turned out that he'd been born and raised in Germany. But he didn't think of himself as German. He thought it was remarkable that he had a friend who was, from the majority population. And I just don't think you could find that in the United States. I don't think you can find a 12-year-old who was born and raised here who doesn't think of himself as an ally. And that, I think, is a great strength of this country that will persist despite whatever may be happening with this administration and so on. And is one of the reasons why I chose to become a US citizen and why I'm not naive about the challenges of building a multi-ethnic society here, but more hopeful we can build it here than in most other places in the world.
Great. So, Yascha, you have been described at times as a democracy hipster. You realize, or sorry, democracy crisis hipster. You realize that liberal democracy was in crisis before it was cool, before the rest of us came to understand it. Ian Basson earlier made reference to some of your research, although without attribution, Ian. Talk to us a little bit about the research that you had done prior to the 2016 election that actually showed some of the warning signs about attachment to democracy and some of the sort of core principles of liberal democracy.
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand that this crisis started before Donald Trump turned up, which means that unfortunately it's going to continue even after, hopefully, I don't know, it's more one-seat-friendly, we beat him in 2020. And there's lots of reasons for that. When you look around the world, you saw for a time populist parties and politicians, movements rising in lots of countries around the world, well before 2016. You saw people being really disenchanted with basic elements of the system. So famously, for years before 2016, you asked about approval ratings of second-hand car salesmen, and there were about 15%. You asked them their approval ratings for Congress, and it was about 8%. Fewer people. There comes the end. Mike just called you out here. And then you saw people saying that by and large politicians can try to do the right thing. So all of these kind of worrying signs. And social scientists sort of pushed all of that stuff away and said, no, we don't have to worry. It's fine. The way to understand that is that citizens are becoming more critical in their doing, that they're becoming more demanding. You distinguish between government legitimacy and regime legitimacy. So government legitimacy just means how popular are particular governments and institutions. Regime legitimacy means how deeply committed are people to the basic underlying democratic system itself. And so I went out with a colleague about before to look at whether it was the case, whether it was really true that people had the same commitment to the underlying democratic system as they did, as we believed. And it turned out that wasn't the case. And I think Ian cited some of those figures. For example, when you look at older Americans born in the 1930s and 1940s, over two-thirds say it's essential to live in a democracy. When you ask younger Americans born since 1980, less than one-third do. And you see similarly worrying figures in a bunch of European countries. So in Germany, where I grew up, 20 years ago, 1 in 6 people, that's a lot, said that a strong ruler who doesn't have to go with parliament or elections is a good thing. Now it's 1 in 3. And in France and the UK, it has gone from 1 in 4 to 1 in 2. So you see that sort of challenge really coming from a deep anger and disenchantment about functioning of our political system, pre-existing Trump, and be more expressed in the United States.
So I want to get into your sort of understanding of those dynamics a bit. In your book that came out earlier this year, The People versus Democracy, which I really commend to everyone, you make what I think is a fairly unique argument that I haven't seen others make, which is that when we think of liberal democracy, those two words, when we say the phrase, they go together. We think of them as sort of a unitary, a unified concept. And you actually argue that there's sort of two distinct things and that they're coming apart more and more. Talk to us about that and give us a sense of what is your kind of current assessment of the political situation in the US and around the world when it comes to democracy?
Yeah, so I think to understand our political system, you have to understand there's two basic animating values, and it's helpful to keep them apart. So the first is just individual freedom, right? We want to live in a political system in which we get to decide what to say or not say, who to worship, how to worship, and whether to worship at all, how to lead our private lives. In order to sustain that, we need individual rights, we need protections for minorities, but we also need to have things like separation of powers, rule of law. Because if the president or prime minister dislikes you and has the power to throw you into prison, you don't really have freedom of speech. Right? So the second thing we need.
So and that's the liberal part.
That's the liberal part. When I say liberal here, I don't obviously mean in terms of liberal conservative, I mean sort of more than liberal, the philosophical sense in which, George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan are as much liberals as Barack Obama or Bill Clinton. And the second is the democratic element of our politics. So that we want to also have forms of collective self-determination. That we don't have a dictator or a monarch or a strongman or a priest tell us how we should lead our lives, that we together determine our political fate. That's the democratic element, the rule of the people. So my sense is that for a long time, those two things have started to drift apart. But we've had political systems which were reasonably liberal, that despite certain shortcomings, by and large managed to uphold the rule of law, managed to treat people, respect people's rights to a reasonable extent. But then they weren't great at translating popular views into public policies. That because of the rise of mining politics, because of independent central courts, independent central banks, because of trade treaties and international organizations, and all of those things taken together, a lot of people have the feeling that nobody really listens to me anyway. And they sort of had a point of feeling like that. Now, in part, the counter-reaction, what we see is the rise, not of rights about democracy, but of what I would call democracy without rights, or illiberal democracy, of populists who come in and say, look, I stand for real people. I stand for real people like you and me. The only real problems we have in our political system is that the elites are corrupt and self-serving, and that they care more about various minorities, and so the old norms of the political system, which are all rotten anyway. And so what we need to do is to sweep all of that aside and have a much more plebiscitary form of democracy. Something where I interpret what people really want. Anybody who disagrees with me is by nature of that illegitimate. You give me a bit more power to get things done. And of course what happens is that they make these huge outside promises on which we can't deliver because things are complicated. And so when they don't deliver, they start to say, well, it's the fault of the opposition who are traitors, it's the fault of the judiciary and the FBI who are enemies of the people, it's the fault of newspapers and television channels which spread fake news and have to be regulated and brought under control. And so once all of that happens, in the first instance, it attacks the liberal element of our political system. It starts often by victimizing minorities, as we're seeing in this country now, or as we're seeing in the Jewish community in Hungary and Poland very strongly. It goes on to undermine the rule of law, where the strongman starts to have so much control over the judiciary, where it becomes so difficult to criticize him that you no longer have a real separation of powers. What matters is not the law, it's not constitutional principles, it's the word and the whim of the strongman. But once all of that starts to happen, it also starts to undermine the democratic element of the system itself. And so you get to a point which we've reached in Hungary, for example, in which it becomes impossible to remove a democratically elected president or prime minister by democratic means. And so the rise of liberal democracy is a danger because it turns itself against one of the core principles of we should care about citizens, and I also think we should care about as Jews, which is the protection of individuals and the protection of minority rights. But it's also dangerous because once it goes beyond that, it actually starts to cannibalize the democratic element of the system itself and rob our ability
So it's interesting, as conversations about democracy sort of proliferate, and for the conversation we've had here today, there's actually two terms that often come up that you haven't touched on yet, and those are polarization and tribalism. Talk to me a little bit about how polarization and tribalism factor into your thinking. What's sort of cause and effect here in terms of the state of our politics and polarization that we're facing, and how do you think it factors into sort of how we move out of this situation?
Yeah, so I think more broadly my argument in the book, so there's three big driving factors of all of this. It's the stimulation of living standards for ordinary citizens, which I think makes a lot of people no longer be willing to give the benefit of the doubt in the political system. It is the fact that we're actually closer to achieving an equal multi-ethnic society than we were at any previous point in our history. There are certain people who dislike that, who rebel against it. But it's also the rise of the internet and of social media. And when you talk about particularly the polarization piece of this, I think that's crucial. I always go back to a story that I stumbled across on Twitter a few months ago, which is, a lady who's a vegan activist on Twitter and spends a lot of her time proselytizing for people to give up eating meat and dairy products and so on. And she lives in a suburb. She came home to her house, and it was a lovely sunny day, and there was a bunch of kids on the street, and they were eating ice cream, except for one who was desperately crying. And so she walks up to this little girl and says, "What's going on? Are you okay?" She says, "Yeah, all my friends got ice cream and I don't have money." And so she goes and buys the little girl ice cream and posts about it on Twitter. What do you think happens next? All of her vegan activist friends start to call her out for being a traitor to the cause, a shill of the dairy industry, and so on and so forth. And it shows something about social media which I think is sort of connected to a natural human instinct. That, if I'm sort of over here, and all of my friends are sort of around here, then I naturally get drawn towards their political opinion. And before social media, a lot of our social groups were somewhat politically mixed. They were never a perfect representation of a country, but you went to synagogue, you went to your school, you lived in a block, you talked to your neighbors. So there's always some heterogeneity, some mix of political views. Now in social media, everybody you follow becomes very similar to you. And so suddenly everybody's over here, you egg each other on, you actually scoot over further into the extreme. And that can be extreme left, it can be extreme right, it can be veganism, it can be extreme fitness, it can be whatever, right? And that, I think, is one of the things that's driving our polarization. And when you have the second phenomenon added on top of that, that we can really misjudge where people are actually at. So when I look at my Twitter feed in the languages that we study which just came out, most of the people who follow me, most of the people who I follow, are part of a kind of particular American tribe. And this is not a tribe defined by age or race or anything like that. It's by a cluster of political groups. So about 8% of the US population, according to the study, makes up this tribe of progressive activists. They're the kind of people who decide to spend their Sunday afternoon listening to people like us. They often have higher degrees, they're often a little bit more affluent than the average of a population. They're actually often a proportion to it. And they have sort of quite consistent liberal, even left of liberal views about the world. And so when I look at my friends, at my colleagues at university, at the people who I encounter on my Twitter feed, and the people who I read when I open the New York Times and the Atlantic, they are hugely overproportionately drawn from this group. But they're only about 8% of the population. And so I don't actually have a good representation of the rest of the population. And so this tribe drives the perception of the left. And there's a similar phenomenon on the right, where the most sort of devoted, hardcore conservatives drive people's perception of what right-of-center people in our country think. And so I do think that, in a way, that leads us to overestimate how polarized the country is, but it also drives the polarization, because it sets the balance of what the Wall Street Journal is willing to publish on the right. It sets the balance of what the New York Times is willing to publish on the left. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that these two things are exactly equivalent, but it over-accentuates the real division of views that people have in the country.
So I would also recommend this study to people. It's called Hidden Tribes, and it came out last week. It's very, very interesting. So, Yascha, your colleagues at Harvard, Daniel Ziblatt and Steve Levitsky, wrote a book, which I will also recommend, earlier in the year called How Democracies Die. And one of the arguments that they make towards the end of the book about how we're going to get out of this mess in our politics is that we need to build cross-partisan coalitions that actually cut across sort of traditional partisan axes rather than reinforcing the basic divisions that already exist. And one of the ways that you and I know each other over the last 2 years is we've been part of one of those coalitions. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about this. Do you agree with that analysis? And what has it been like in your experience to actually be in a coalition of people focused on the future of democracy who are people that, you know, in your own words, in another situation would be your political enemies? What is that experience actually like?
Well, not political enemies, which I think is important. So there's a great distinction.
So not in your own words.
In my non-words. There's an important distinction that Michael Ignatieff, political philosopher, former Canadian politician, has drawn between political adversaries and political enemies. And that's very important, right? So every candidate in a democracy is going to say, hey, you know what? The government isn't doing a great job, and I can be better than them, and the stakes are high, and you really got to go and do this irrational thing, which is to stand in line in order to vote for me, or this even more rational thing, which is to like go and knock on neighbors' doors, make phone calls for me, because things really matter. That guy is really bad. Right? That's a normal part of democracy. But it's being political adversaries. Because you can do all of that and at the same time recognize that, you know what, in the end, if the other guy wins, that's bad, but we're going to fix it. We'll have another chance to beat him 4 years from now. And he's not a horrible human being, our country will survive. In fact, I know that distinction exists because in one of his greater moments, John McCain drew that distinction very clearly in 2008. And perhaps when he passed away, that clip sort of was played a bunch, perhaps you've seen it again recently, at a town hall a few days before the election, a lady stood up and said, you know, Barack Obama is, you know, an Arab, and he's not a good person, and if he wins, I fear for my country, what should we do? And John McCain said, no, it's really important that I win. I really disagree with Barack Obama on many things, but you know what, he's a decent person, and if he wins, you're going to have to be scared for our country. That's drawing that distinction between adversaries and enemies. Very, very stark. Now, when the political stakes get higher and higher and higher, it's tempting to catastrophize. It's tempting to say, no, the other people are enemies. And we're obviously seeing Donald Trump do that all of the time. And actually still ratcheting up that rhetoric. If you've seen what he said about Democrats over the last week or so, saying that precisely they're a mob that's dangerous and they rule that will destroy the country. That's exactly that kind of rhetoric. So the question is, how can we build not agreement with people who are very different from us politically? There's a whole bunch of people who are part of this group with whom I have deep, deep disagreements about important issues. And the point of this group is not to keep over this. The point is not that we're all going to end up agreeing about the role that religion should play in this country, for example, or even about something like abortion. But we do need to be able to build the mutual trust that if they win, I can say, that's bad, but you know what, I'll beat the bastards 4 years from now. And until then, I hope they're going to do a decent job. Right? It means that we should be able to stand up to our own side and say, hey, perhaps it's in our party's advantage right now to pack the court. But that is not the way that we deal with this political situation, because we all need our political institutions to be intact in order to be able to trust each other, because we have a chance to win candidates. And I found that that's a lot easier when you sit down with somebody, you have a sense of who somebody is, what the values are, where they're coming from. So I think one of the biggest tests in this group has been over the last weeks, because the depth of partisanship in the country as a whole was the deepest it's been basically since election night in 2016, when we were all waiting for Kavanaugh's confirmation to the Supreme Court. And one of the members of this group, David French, has been very, very outspoken in his defense of Kavanaugh. And I think if I didn't know him, I would have found it easier to dismiss him. Say, oh, this is somebody who's arguing in bad faith, or somebody who doesn't care about women, or doesn't care about minorities, or the kinds of accusations that easily fly around our politics. But when you had dinner with him, he tells you about his decision to adopt, a then, I believe, 3-year-old girl from Ethiopia who was severely malnourished, when he knew that she would, in many ways, struggle to catch up and so on, and the way in which his evangelical faith led him to make the decision, and the kind of ways in which, when he came out against Donald Trump in the 2016 primaries, people sent him the most vile forms of racial hatred for his daughter, photoshopping her into concentration camps, for example. It makes it hard to look at him and say, oh, just because he's in favor of Brett Kavanaugh, he must be a bad person, and he doesn't have moral values, and he's really bad guy. And so for me, it has meant that in one of the most difficult moments of the last 2 years, the last 2 years have been plenty, full of difficult moments, it's allowed me to have more compassion for someone. Not to agree with him, but to say, all right, he must have a reason for saying what he said. And I should take that seriously, and perhaps that opens my mind a little bit to how the other half of the country sees things.
So one of the, to piggyback on that point, one of the kind of concepts that we use in this group is the idea of achieving disagreement, which is to say, not, as Yascha said, that we are trying to come to agreement on everything. We have deep political disagreements, right? There is polarization in the country. People do have very different views. But that if we can achieve disagreement, we can actually understand what it is we disagree about. And the idea behind that is that oftentimes we don't actually know what we're disagreeing about because we don't take the time to really understand the argument. We don't take the time to understand what the other person is saying. We definitely don't take the time to understand the values that are actually underlying the things that they're saying. And so if we can actually take the time to really dig down, I think oftentimes we actually do find there's a lot of things that we do agree on, and that we have core disagreements, and understanding and clarifying those core disagreements is really important. I'm wondering for you, as you have sort of personally gone through this, and not just in this group, but in this moment where, my sense is that you are generally trying to be a listener and to not make assumptions, and even if you can't sit down and have dinner with everyone, I think you're trying to bring that orientation into your work and your contribution to the sort of political discourse. What does that discipline look like? I mean, if all of us in this room were to try and do that without having the benefit always of being in rooms where we can get to know our political adversaries, how do we actually sort of train ourselves mentally for what is really feels like a very difficult thing to do?
Well, so I think, look, you can't have dinner with everybody on the other side, but you can make sure that you have dinner with a few people on the other side. And then they can slightly be your guides, right? Because, when I want to understand in the most charitable possible light the views that certain people on the conservative side have at the moment, as you would guess, this sort of leading liberal, then I look at what David French has to say about it, for example, because I know him well enough that I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. And then once I read what he has to say, it to some extent helps me understand what other conservatives might have to say. Because I haven't had dinner with them, but I can see that they have a similar style of argumentation and that David French is sort of in good faith about it and perhaps they are too. Now here, of course, is a problem, and the limitation, and that's a limitation which is a feature, not a bug, I think, of the group we're part of, but which we should be self-critical about. Or not even self-critical about, which shows the limits of what's possible at this moment, and perhaps ever, which is that in the end, deep as my disagreements with David French may be on all kinds of issues, on the thing that is most important right now, we wholeheartedly agree. And that's that Donald Trump is a danger to democracy in this country. And that he's unfit for political office. And so how you achieve agreement with, how you achieve disagreement with people who aren't in my camp on that, I don't know, I'm not even sure that it's desirable, but it does show the limits of it. Now, hopefully, and this is the sort of way to try and be optimistic about the future, we will get back to a moment in which, and I think we were 5 or 10 years ago, in which everybody who has real power in this country is at least in some kind of way committed to those underlying rules and norms of liberal democracy, where everybody sees each other as perhaps quite fierce adversaries, but not as enemies. And then you might have some amount of understanding like that across the aisle. I think that's possible because we've had that for most, not all, but most parts of our history. But it's hard to see a way forward to that. It does still help us understand what we need to get to. I mean, I think it's crucially important that we manage to create a counterweight to the total domination that the Republican Party, beholden to Donald Trump, has accomplished right now. I also think it's really important in 2020 that we manage to propose a president who, frankly, does not have the commitment to democratic rules and norms. But I also think that in order to ensure that our democracy is no longer in danger, something else has to happen. And that's that we need a right of center political party, to which I would belong, but which we need, which is committed to those democratic norms and values, and that can represent the views of the closest 50% of this country. That's right of center. And how we create that is one of the questions that's going to stay with us, even if everything goes as well as it possibly can in the next 2 years or so.
So I want to come back to your book for a second, because there's a concept you talk about in there that I think is it's related to what we're getting at here, and it's the idea of actually creating an inclusive nationalism. And to tie back to the early thread on kind of identity and on building a sort of inclusive multi-ethnic society, what is your sense of sort of nationalism, right? Nationalism is a concept that we often think of as kind of identified with a certain chauvinism, a kind of American-centric, view of the world. And so, as somebody who also comes from the left, it's a term that we're often uncomfortable with. But I think it connects in here, and I'd love to hear you just describe for a moment how you think about nationalism and why you think it's actually a really important concept in this moment.
Yeah, so look, as a German Jew born to communist grandparents and so on, it won't surprise you that I didn't exactly grow up as a nationalist. And that my aspiration for, my early adult life, when I started to think about politics, was to overcome those kinds of more provincial allegiances altogether. Right? For us all to become some form of cosmopolitan who learns to have the same attachment, the same care for everybody around the world as we do about people in our own country. And I changed my mind on that. I've changed my mind on that for a strategic reason and a slightly deeper reason. The strategic reason is that when you look around the world, I think it's hard to conclude that for the last 20 years, nationalism has remained by far and away the most powerful political force. I think of nationalism as a half-domesticated animal that will always remain dangerous, but can always run wild. And if we leave it to its own devices, the worst kinds of people are going to step in and stoke it and bait it until it does tremendous damage. And so I think strategically, a better bet is to try and domesticate it more fully. To step in and try to engage with it, to make it useful rather than harmful. And my version of that is an inclusive nationalism, an inclusive patriotism, which says, look, it's fine to have a special set of allegiances to people who are your fellow citizens. In fact, and this is the deeper, more principled reason, historically, nationalism has allowed us to expand the circle of human sympathy. It's patriotism and nationalism which allows us to have commitment to people beyond our own family, beyond our own village, beyond our co-religionists, or people of our own ethnicity. It's what allows us to sit in San Francisco and say, if there's a horrible storm in Florida, then we care about the people who are harmed by that, even if they might have different ethnicity. It allows us to sit here and say it is a crying shame that this country has not sufficiently come to the help of our fellow citizens in Puerto Rico after the power storm there a year ago. So we can actually have a regenerated force in that kind of way. So we want to fight for nationalism, which is different from that of Donald Trump and the populist right in Europe in two ways. It's inclusive, which means that everybody who's living in our country should be eligible to be included in it, irrespective of their skin color or their religion or their origin. And it recognizes at an international level that of course our president will always look out for our own interests. Barack Obama, even though he frankly would not have used that phrase, put America first. And so did Tony Bush, and so did Bill Clinton, and so did every other president in the history of our country. But unlike Donald Trump, they recognize that you can love your own wife without disliking the wives of others. That you can fight for the interests of your own country without denigrating the legitimate interests of other countries. And then there are lots of win-wins in which something that is good for me is also good for America's allies. And so I think if we fight for that kind of nationalism, we have a higher chance of winning the fight against the far right. And that doesn't mean that nationalism will completely cease being dangerous. I think this idea that there's a clear distinction between a good form of patriotism and a bad form of nationalism, and one can never turn to the other, is illusory. Nationalism is an incredibly powerful psychological modulator, and it will always be a continual struggle to make sure that it remains sane and productive rather than dangerous. But running away from it is not the solution.
Great, thank you, Yascha. We are going to open up for Q&A. We've got about 10 minutes, so I think there are, as always, mics on the sides. Anybody has questions? It's good to see we haven't stunned everyone into silence.
You spent a lot of time talking about the dangers of loyalty to a particular person who may be turning into a demagogue or pulling on those strings. Someone earlier, Congressman, talked about the dangers of parties. And so I was wondering if you could talk about before, because your research extends before the current president, to the extent there was loyalty to party of the country, and how long that's been with us, and if that is something that exists in a similar realm of danger.
You you've managed to hit on the only thing in the world that I slightly disagree with Mickey Edwards. Sorry. Look, I think parties are a fascinating thing in the theory of democracy, because most of the people who founded democracies around the world didn't think very much about them, and insofar as they thought about them, they tried to minimize the role. And yet, there hasn't been a functioning democracy in the world in which parties didn't end up having a huge role. That's partially because of the size of our countries. So if they were much, much smaller, it would be easy to say, well, look, we live in a kind of community, and we just elect the guy or gal who, we trust, is upright, is smart, and so on, and they'll do the job for us. So because actually, very quickly, most democracies reached a scale where you didn't know people that well, that became hard. And it's also because there are people unused to politics. And so you need a kind of cognitive cue, right? You don't really know much about this candidate or that, but you know whether it has a D or an R behind the name, and you have a broad sense of what Democrats and Republicans stand for, and so that allows you to make a decision. So I think it's going to be really, really hard to get rid of parties altogether. But there are two things we can do. The first is that at the moment, I actually think we have too little partisanship and too much negative partisanship. People don't love the political parties in this country. Very few people actually say, I'm a Democrat, I love the Democrats. And that's the same on the other side. Very few people say, I'm a Republican, I just think the Republican Party is the best thing in the world. But what people do say is, I'm a Democrat because those Republicans scare me. Well, I'm a Republican because I really hate those Democrats. Right? And that's something that I think we can have to try and change. And then I do think that there's ways of fighting for our basic civic values and trying to give people more of an attachment to the political system itself and to the liberties that it grants, which might not make them overcome parties, not make them completely unpartisan, but might make them say, even though I'm proud partisan, I really want my side to win, I'm not scared when the other side wins, and if my own side becomes a danger to the system, I want to stand up to my own side. So that I think is a more realistic goal than getting everybody to stop being partisans.
There is, I think, an Israeli author who recently wrote a book in which he said something that seemed really interesting to me, which was that liberalism unchecked is dangerous. It runs the risk of obliterating the nation state, and hence there is some balance that between nationalism and liberalism that makes sense. Could you speak to that and whether or not maybe what we're seeing here is not as awful as we think, it's just a question of degree, the populism versus liberalism?
Yeah, I think it's always a little difficult with those sort of big terms because everybody uses them slightly differently, and so there may be some kinds of definitions of liberalism on which that's true. The way that I've set out liberalism, I don't think it is. I don't think sacrificing our individual rights, I don't think sacrificing rule of law or the separation of powers is somehow necessary in order for our nation to be truly liberalized. And that's the thing that populists always end up doing. To me, what truly makes somebody a populist, and what unites all of these different forces around the world which otherwise don't seem to have a ton in common, from Donald Trump to President Erdogan to Viktor Orban to Kaczynski, is that they say, I alone stand for real people. And so anybody who doesn't agree with me, anybody who stands in the way of the realization of this pure popular will, is a traitor, is an enemy of the people. That's why there's this tension between their understanding of nationalism, between that form of populism and liberalism. And no, I don't think that it helps us to somehow realize some big value. I think it's a trap that allows would-be dictators to destroy our political systems and enrich themselves and take on more and more power.
Thank you. One of the things that you talked about is the problem of parties, and I guess what I see is that the United States is rare among democracies in the world that doesn't have some form of proportional representation. And if we had proportional representation, so you could support your center-right party without worrying about whether or not it got a plurality or majority, but you see that as solving the problem.
No, for a couple of reasons. The first is that there's plenty of countries that have a system of proportional representation, which makes it easier for there to be lots of different parties, and yet we see the rise of very scary far-right populists in those countries too. Poland and Hungary, for example, do have a party system, or at least they did until the populists properly took over, and people were still attracted to those extreme alternatives to democracy. The other thing is that, I always have this argument with a friend of mine who, I respect deeply, very good political scientist, Lee Druckmann, said, oh, this would solve some of the problems because people could vote for political forces that were similar to them, and perhaps they would stop the extremes from being able to dominate, right? And instead of Trump capturing the whole Republican Party, a whole bunch of people would have voted for a Libertarian Party, a whole bunch of people would have voted for an Evangelical Party, and Trump would have 20-25%. I mean, that's true, but I think the country would be really hard to govern. So what would, a Congress look like if we had proportional representation? Right? So our political system leads to the creation of two parties because of a wasted vote problem, right? You might want to vote for the Greens or the Libertarian Party or whatever, but you know that unless you vote for the biggest party, your vote is just wasted. Whereas the system of proportional representation, usually, as long as nationwide about 5% of people vote for a party, it gets represented, so you're much more willing to vote for parties that are closer to your ideological ideas. And so the good thing about it is you get to vote for a party which actually resembles your views more closely. That's a real advantage of it. The disadvantage is that you don't get the amalgamation of political views you get here, where Democrats and Republicans build these broad-based coalitions with structural politics, right? And so instead, I think we would get 6 or 7 parties in this country. We would get this sort of woke party, right? We would get this sort of slightly more milquetoast center-left liberal party. We would get a libertarian party. We would get a sort of small business, lower taxes, but actually look out for small businesses over big corporations and so on kind of party. Right? We would get an evangelical party. We would get a sort of far-right populist party. And I may have forgotten one or two. Right? We may actually have a separate African-American party, something like that. So we get 6 or 7 different parties, and it's really hard to think about how we're going to be making coalitions, and whether that might not actually exacerbate divisions and partisanship even more than the current two-party system. So these are broad-based coalitions. So for those 2 reasons, I'm a little skeptical about this whole thing.
We have one last question over here.
If I look back through the lens of the 2016 election to now, would you say that the country has moved into a sense of tribalism throughout the country between the 2 parties?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that I find sobering, I have to say, about the last 2 years is that there was a moment early on when it still felt like it was Trump versus the institutions. That this was, even if not an operation that came out of nowhere, because I knew it had come from realism and so on, something where, we could have a relatively broad coalition of people who say, this is not normal. And we got to defend our system against this so that we can go back to real divisions between us, but a more healthy partisanship. And I think 2 things have happened, particularly over the last half a year or a year, which have made me a little more skeptical of that. The first is a lot of, not all of them, and I think we know a lot of people think that's not true, but a lot of conservatives who used to be anti-Trump deciding that, you know what, this is what I tried with that, what you need to be a conservative is just do whatever Trump wants, and be a president. And people like Lindsey Graham are a really shocking example of that. But then also I think people on the left basically saying, there's nobody who's conservative with whom I can have any kind of fellow citizenship. And the stakes of this moment are such that we just have to have our track going. The only solution for our track to win is to eradicate the other track, not literally win the party. And so I think there's a lot of impatience on the left of actually trying to think about how to preserve the kind of homes and institutions we need for the system to work in the long run. And even some people who are saying, who cares about democracy, or really care about substantive issues. And that's always the truth. So I do think the partisanship has gotten deeper than I feared. I think the erosion of institutions has gotten deeper. But on the other hand, we've also seen that the resistance towards attacks on institutions has been a bit more resourceful than might have imagined as well. I mean, I'm surprised by how quickly people did understand that there is a threat to our democracy. Because for years I had said there could be a threat to our democracy, people sort of laughed at me. That's the democracy crisis experiment, right? So I think we've realized, a lot of people understood. And even though the economy is going pretty well, not like the virtual presidents, but it is going pretty well, he remains quite unpopular. And so I do think that there's a chance for us to pull ourselves together. And there's still perhaps a chance that we realize we're facing an abyss and will make the deep changes across the aisle we need in order not to get there. But it's a narrow path, which makes it all more important for us to push towards.
So we're just about out of time. I want to close by sort of emphasizing one point, which Yascha just touched on, which is that the commitment to democracy, the commitment to liberal democracy cannot become a partisan issue. We're a two-party system. Both parties have to maintain that commitment, which means we all have work to do on a cross-partisan basis to ensure that this fundamental commitment doesn't become polarized and doesn't become partisan. And obviously there's ways in which we all feel that happening, but it is really incumbent upon us to hold that together. And so I just want to say, there are groups, one was referenced earlier, Better Angels, which are really working at the grassroots level to have cross-partisan dialogue. There are a number of groups that work sort of inside the Beltway in DC to do the same. And then there are institutions like Protect Democracy, the Brennan Center, and the JCRC that I think are really doing vital work to basically do what I just said, which is to maintain a cross-partisan commitment to this thing we call democracy. And I think that's the most fundamental and most important thing we can be doing right now. So thank you, Abby, thank you, Ian, and thank you all for doing it.